Hello, beautiful people. I am Oliver Perrin for Semiagog, and I'm going to jump into the IP debate that has been raging in the background with RadLib starting the trouble with Lambda and Academic Agent and others. And then it got carried over to AA's channel. And yeah, I'm going to jump in with some features and things that I think people should consider that are very important in this discussion, I would think. Yeah, you will be the judge of that, but you know, it depends on your ability to properly plumb the depths of my genius, and I doubt most of you are qualified to do so. Yes, tongue only partially in cheek. I do want to ask everyone whether or not the audio and video is good. I've got the usual thing of when I'm live streaming, which is where the computer fan starts roaring no matter what I do. And I have the damn most expensive Apple that I could buy as of 6 months ago, and it's still just blazing with the fans going. So yeah, I don't know what's up with that. I've got a microphone set up over here. Let me know if the audio and video are good. I'm going to skip shilling the business of my books because I don't want to jump into this quickly. I'm going to present my basic ideas, and then there will be room for everyone to attack me. I think most of that is going to come down to fraud, you know, claims about fraud. So we'll see. My primary concern is to get some other issues on the table that I think matter, that I haven't heard anyone directly discuss. They've sort of touched on it in passing without having seemed to have fully recognized its importance and value. The one thing I will not skip, however, is to say follow this channel, Semiagog, as well as A Safer Space. You can do it on YouTube, you can do it on BitChute, but I'm asking you personally to go over and do it on Odyssey, which seems to be the most promising of the upcoming platforms. You can also follow me on Twitter, on Minds, on Gab, and on Telegram. As an alternative platform, although it has some clear limitations, doubtless, I still want to recommend everybody go over and follow me on Telegram. I'm particularly concerned about the crew that I mainly communicate with through Twitter, because if I get booted off of there, I lose the ability to talk to all kinds of people that I schedule streams with and all the rest. So I would hope at some point that people like Academic Agent will get their asses over to Telegram. I understand he doesn't like it much. I've seen that Charlemagne is over there and never uses it. So it's, you know, it's pretty much like me with Minds, but at least have an account over there so I have a way to reach people. Please consider that. And the other thing that I will not skip is to share the Praetorian Chads who make this channel possible. These are my patrons. These mighty people who make this channel possible and who keep it rolling. I want to thank them one and all, as I've said many times before. And as you can see on the screen there, all of the credit and none of the blame. Now, I am seeing John Ski, hello, sir, saying that my voice is not synced up with the video. The video and audio are not synced. If anybody else is seeing that, let me know, just because I'd be interested to know. However, there's nothing I know of that I can do that would correct that. So we'll see. So I'm just going to pour myself this little beverage. Hopefully everybody knows what's been going on here. I would definitely recommend going over to RadLib's channel and seeing the initial sort of discussion that happened over there, both pro and anti-IP. I'm not sure everybody was able to get their arguments out in full, but do check it out. I recommend RadLib's channel anyway. He's a good guy, a friend of my channel, excellent gentleman, appears on Academic Agent's channel all of the time. Obviously, go over and check out Academic Agent's channel if you are not familiar with, and all my other friends like Pharaoh and Apostolistic Majesty and Charlemagne and Prudentialist and Mr. Patriarch and a whole bunch of other people. Check them out. That's the background for what's going on here. Debate that first occurred over on RadLib's channel, which you can see, I think it's the second to last. It's the one just before the most recent discussion titled on intellectual property. And then there is one that that Academic Agent posted. I believe it's on his own channel. And then he has, yeah, it's on his channel, his main one. And then it's off on his side channel, AA Gold. He responded to some people who had comments to make about it. So that's how you can sort of get caught up on this, and you know, come over on Twitter and see how everybody's arguing and hissing and spitting there. So what is the background for this thing? I've got a bunch of notes all over the place. I'm sorry, this is the usual thing of, I would have written you a shorter note, but I didn't have time. This is something that I'm actually working on as part of a much bigger project with a book. And when this thing came up with IP, it was very interesting to me because there are all sorts of things I'm looking at in the origin of human mark making and mark use, and expanding the definition of writing from writing proper, meaning representing language, either phonetically or otherwise, to a broader understanding of what writing is, and the recognition that if we broaden the definition, we can see quite clearly and very, very usefully, in terms of shedding light on all manner of human phenomena, that writing is something that we share with animals. But we'll get into that a little bit. The point is, though, that I'm working on this book, and in looking at marks and the rest, property marks, territorial marks, resource marks, which are all marks that indicate ownership in some fashion or another across species, as well as across all human cultures. I'm not familiar with any human culture wherein the making of a mark does not indicate property ownership. Anyway, or resource control or territorial claims, etc. So this business of IP is very, very interesting to me because it has as fundamental to it the idea of trademarks, right? The idea of copyright, which has its own little symbol, you know, the circle with the C inside it. It has less to do with patents, but I think that somebody who knew more about patents and, you know, what's going on, maybe just the marking of patent pending, you know, the little mark of the TM for trademark that goes on an object and shows that you own it. Or like somebody making the signature at the bottom of a painting showing that it's theirs, or animals patrolling a border and pissing on something to show that it is their border, it is patrolled, and therefore there is a claim to that territory, which any other encroaching animal would have to contest if they wanted to take that territory. Cattle brands, all sorts of things, maker's marks that appear on objects. All of these things fall under this umbrella. So when this business of IP came up, I was thinking to myself, wow, this is something that I've looked at and I've studied, and it seems to me that it just seems overwhelmingly obvious to me that all these different things that I just brought up would in some fashion or another bear on the topic under discussion. And it was interesting to me to see that, with a couple little exceptions where people brushed up against things, mainly AA, because he's much more sensible than the rest of the so-called libertarians. I love people like Radlib. These are good people. I'm mostly playing, but it was interesting to me to see that for the most part it didn't come up. So in talking about this, the first thing I should say is, obviously I'm not an economist. I can't roll with the economist people. I couldn't even begin to keep up with Radlib. I cannot begin to keep up with AA in this respect at all. So I don't intend to. What I'd like to do is make sure that some things are pointed out on the game board that I think matter, because they operate across species and they're very, very important. And any consideration over whether or not various intellectual property rights, particularly things like trademark and copyright, less so. I'm not as familiar and conversant with all the stuff going on with patent law. But certainly when you're thinking about things like copyright and trademark, this stuff very much applies. And I'll also add, as should become apparent while I'm talking about this stuff as it moves forward, I'm not just talking out of my ass as regards the topic of not only copyright, because I'm dealing with writing, come from a family of writers and editors, blah, 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 but also trademarks, because I'm dealing with branding all of the time. And the fundamental focus of all of that is a mark that indicates identity. It's really the intersection of identity and value is what we call a brand. Now, that value can be construed much more broadly than we talk about, like a price value, right? It could be family values. It could be a morale value for a raised banner on a battlefield. I mean, there are a bunch of ways that identity and value intersect in ways that we as animals, just like many other animals, and that's an important point, use to orient within our environments and to have a better chance of survival, right? The orientation, the reliability of environmental marks, territorial marks, and resource marks translate directly to survival value, and they therefore exert selection pressure. And so that's the whole thing that was sort of missing from the discussion of intellectual property that made me go, where is this stuff that should be there, that should be should be a part of this discussion. So I'm not an economist guy, and I'm not even any kind of an IP expert. So, I'm not saying that there aren't problems with our existing IP. I'm not saying that there are other ways, perhaps even some of them advanced by the quote unquote anti-IP people, that would address the concerns that I'm about to raise, and perhaps better than the current system. But to whatever degree I misunderstand the anti-IP folks, I think half of it's their fault because they branded themselves as anti-IP, which brings to mind all sorts of ideas about how anybody can do anything and there are no legal protections for it. They like to come down to this thing of fraud. I am not prepared specifically for the subject of fraud, but I'm going to turn to it in the question and answer section at the end, and we'll take a look at it. Because I'd like to address it insofar as I'm able, and that's probably going to require some people in the comments coming in and saying, this is why we're saying fraud is protection, and I can put my answer up and they can reply, and maybe we can work it out from there. But I want to get the main part out. So I'm not an IP guy, I'm not an economist, and all the rest. So what am I going to cover? And this will act as a quick recap for people who are coming in late, what this is about. I'm answering or inserting myself into a group of debates. That's the last thing I should say, which I think academic agent is entirely right on, at least in terms of his general thrust and his attitude towards it. He is simply, because he's not a foamy-mouthed universalist who not only thinks that you can come up with something that will apply in all circumstances, but he's not a person who thinks that you should, which just makes me say, God bless him, a particularist who understands that you don't have to come up, and that you can't even arguably come up with a one-size-fits-all solution that you apply in all circumstances and the rest. It's a real problem. Thankfully, just sort of based on native instinct, AA seems to get that. But anyway, I'm going to jump in here, and I'd like to share the animal marking background, which some of you will be familiar with from my streams and clips in the past. There's a whole sequence playlist called Mark Studies that you can check out. I just made the mistake of looking over on the side and seeing Charlemagne bitching. I'm going to come back to just so you know, I'm not going to look at the chat for the time being because I have to get this out. So I'm going to cover the animal mark background. There's more on that in my playlist on marks and mark studies. I hope to advance the idea that there is the extension of nature into culture, and that the evolutionary sort of framework within which we all operate, in nature, in the world. Many people have argued this in the past, that human culture in some respect becomes a new domain or a playing field within which evolutionary stuff unfolds. And then I want to talk about the fact that much of the value in IP, and I could probably go further than saying much of, but at this point, I want to leave myself some wiggle room for someone who comes in, trying to dangle their ball sack on my head or slap me in the face. So the value of much of IP is not about whether or not there was a good idea or a bad one or any of that nonsense. It's that it's known, and that it has value insofar as it is known. Insofar as it isn't known, it doesn't have value. The idea of value, the indication regarding a thing, like saying what is the value of X versus the value of Y, rather than thinking of cost, right? Value in and of itself has a considerable amount of semantic ambiguity, where there's some overlap in there that's very, very interesting, because the value of a thing is what it indicates, what it points towards, or what it conveys, in many respects that are too deep to get into all the permutations of. But my point is that literally to say that a thing has value is to say that a thing is known about it. And intellectual property, a large part of it, certainly things like trademarks, and I would argue just being able to put your name on something as an author, putting your name on something as a director, and the rest, that has value insofar as the name is known. We'll cover some of that. And I also hope to show that the commercial considerations, commerce itself, all that crap is secondary and contingent and way, 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 way down the line of what matters as far as I'm concerned. And I think that that's another problem with the so-called libertarian approach to it. I mean, they like to get in. This is another thing. I'm not great on libertarianism. I couldn't talk to you about Austrian schools, Mises or Hoppe or any of those people. I know nothing about it. I'm not going to claim to. So, if I show my ass a little bit there, you know why. But other than looking, for example, at things like a philosophical basis for property rights and the rest, they really seem to be focused on commerce and business and property rights and commercial exchange and the rest, which is a big focus of theirs. And so I feel like they're not looking at a broader framework, which is like survival value. They can extend it in terms of pragmatism or utilitarianism into those domains, but I've never seen them explicitly take up things that run across species. Maybe you can find it in Marx or something. Maybe these other thinkers that everybody's into show it. I don't know. Forgive me for my ignorance in that respect. And remember, please, that the whole reason that I can offer you a different perspective is because I'm not steeped in that shit. And so I don't have a little set of walls and fences about things that I'm not supposed to question, the marginal theory of such and fuck, or the tragedy of the commons, or all these other things that have been hammered into libertarian or economist type thinkers' brains. So anyway, that's a bunch of ass covering beforehand. And then the last one is, I hope to address this issue of the putative immateriality of anything in terms of intellectual property, which is just sort of preposterous. So let's get into it. I'm big into animal marks and branding and all the rest. I'm going to read you something. This is from Language Sciences. This is an Elsevier publication. This was published for this great semiotician, Roy Harris, comes out of Oxford. He died in the last few years. He was an emeritus professor of linguistics. This was in honor of his 80th birthday. So a bunch of his followers invited me to publish on this because he's great. He did excellent work. And I'm just going to read you the abstract to give you some basic sort of orientation on this. The disconnected way in which marks are classified and considered in various fields of study has hindered the development of any theoretical basis for their consideration as a distinct form of writing as defined in the context of integrational semiology. That integrational semiology is distinct from Saussure or Peirce, and it's advanced by Roy Harris. And this is Language Sciences, Volume 33, Issue 4, July 2011. And my article is entitled Marks, a Distinct Subcategory Within Writing as Integrationally Defined, for those who want to find it. I suggest here that human mark use is best understood as a development of the environmental, object, and resource marking common to many species. It therefore should not be considered solely in a human context. Hopefully it's apparent how marks like trademarks and the little copyright mark or signatures, indications of ownership would overlap with everything that I'm talking about here. If it's not, sorry. In a sufficiently inclusive ethological frame of reference, examination of human mark use should take into account manifestations of other innate predispositions that can be related to our use of marks. For example, aggression, avoidance, interest-specific hierarchy, etc. However, many linguistically derived assumptions about what qualifies as full writing or writing proper, in combination with the negatively defined category of proto-writing, limit the development of non-arbitrary conceptual models and descriptive terminology necessary for such an undertaking. I propose that the spatial context in which marks integrate animal behavior provides the basis for a non-arbitrary determination of a field within integrationist study of writing, marks, and marking behavior. That is to say, that field would be marks and marking behavior. Such an explicitly recognized field of inquiry would be united by the role marks play in integrating the behavior of many species in time and place, a role that shows no necessary relationship with spoken language. Now, there's a bunch of extra stuff there that has to do with the propeller-headed semiotics people and, people with anthropocentric views of writing. The important takeaway here is that I propose that how human beings use marks is shared by how animals use them, and there's a continuum. And I throw into the mix all these other things that I mentioned about the survival value and the rest. So let me just jump over here to give you a few little tastes of here. Now, one of the things that marks do is they limit aggression, and they serve to distribute animals across a landscape in a way that corresponds to the available resources, so that you don't have too many animals in a given region with the biotope dying off because there isn't a correspondence with the resources. Presumably the people into economics and stuff are going to see the way in which that this would bear on this entire discussion. So this is in section 2, context, animal aggression. Konrad Lorenz wrote extensively on the function of aggression among features like fish, rats, monkeys, and geese. His writing frequently emphasizes the relationship between aggression and territorial behavior. His observations suggest that many marks recognized by animals serve particular functions in limiting or channeling intraspecific aggression. Interspecific is between species. Intraspecific is within a given species. That the marks recognized by many animals serve particular functions in limiting or channeling intraspecific aggression and its concomitant, territorial distribution. For example, he describes the bright and striking markings on the bodies of coral fish, contrasting them with the smaller and more intricate markings found on grunts, another type of fish. Without any doubt, this is a quote from Lorenz, without any doubt, these patterns are signals for the recognition of the species by its own members, but their design is such that it can be seen only at very close quarters by members of the species in the immediate vicinity. Conversely, the poster colors of the territorially aggressive coral fish are so arranged that they can be seen and recognized from the greatest possible distance. And we know only too well that the recognition of their own species provokes furious aggression in these fish. End his quote. I go on to say, the relationship between territorial behavior and marking can be so deep as to be inseparable from such basic biological phenomena as the marks physical organisms bear, to say nothing of those they make instinctively. Lorenz's work describes how aggression and its survival value are directly related to territorial distribution. This is the Lorenz quote. The danger of too dense a population of an animal species settling in one part of the available biotope and exhausting all its sources of nutrition, and so starving, can be obviated by a mutual repulsion acting on the animals of the same species, affecting their regular spacing out in much the same manner as electrical charges are regularly distributed all over the surface of a spherical conductor. This, in plain terms, is the most important survival value of intraspecific aggression. So we have this whole background, and there's a lot more I could say about this, and more of it will come up in passing as I go into this stuff. But the basic idea is that marking both on the creatures themselves, as well as the marking of their environment by these creatures serves to, it has survival value. It helps distribute them across the biotope in such a fashion that there is the best chance that sufficient resources will be available for that population, and it will not, grow so large or chaotic and the rest that that it gets hammered in terms of survival value, and there's a negative outcome. So let's jump over here. I've got a series of notes here. The first one is this animal mark background. I hope I've emphasized the importance of survival value. I hope I've emphasized the way in which this crosses human from the animal realm over into the human realm. I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'll give you another example. People who've watched my channel for a while will have heard about it, but look at the way that animals use scent marks in urine to mark their environment. They use it like a dog will go up and piss on a tree along its patrol route, and that indicates what space it's laying a claim to. Another dog comes along and goes, ooh, is that mark higher up on the tree? Does it mean it's a bigger dog? Well, then I guess I'm literally lower on the totem pole. Pissing contests. Weird how these expressions make their way into our fancy anthropocentric human language. They can say, well, is that mark fresh? Or is it a long time ago? Because if it's fresh, I'm going to be looking over my shoulder and a little bit freaked out and disoriented and feeling like I might be under a threat because I can't rely on the fact that there's nobody here to defend territory. I might be an interloper. I might be encroaching. I might be intruding. Something might happen. We see the same kind of thing going on with male bathrooms, right? Where they're pissing all over the place, and women will complain about the fact that urine happens to spray everywhere on the seat, and it stinks in there. And at the same time, exactly where overlapping scent signatures are being placed, you've got all kinds of scratches and marks on the walls, and they're generally of a sexual and aggressive nature. So is it just a coincidence that in the very same place where human beings are contesting a spot because they're all pissing in a place that isn't set aside just for them, that in addition to the urine marking, they do just like animals who scratch the bark of trees and the rest, and otherwise advertise their scent marks or trample a wallow or whatever? or leave scat pellets around to mark it as their own, or rub their fur on it to mark it as their own? Is it a coincidence that human beings also scratch, literally, sometimes with like a key or a penknife or whatever or rock that they carried into the bathroom? They'll scratch aggressive and sexual graffiti, like "I'll kick your ass" or "so and so's a agate." I don't think it is. I think we see a continuum of behavior with territorial marking, and that marking serves to distribute, ideally in a natural environment, everybody out. So there's less likelihood of conflict, which bears on this whole idea of intellectual property. So if we can take it as a given, people can argue with me about it later if they like, but let's just take it as a given for the moment that marks serve a biological function, which is why it's not only all these mammalian species, but also insect species do it. They call it chemical communication. If you want to look into it, there's a great book by Tristram Wyatt on chemical communication that reviews it from insects with alamones and chiromones or whatever, all the way over into reptiles, amphibians, and mammals. And you'll see that all these species use marks in their environment to claim territory, which corresponds to property, and distributes people, which has to do with allocation of resources, which the economists hopefully will be tracking with. Let's go ahead and go with this further idea that you can extend nature into culture. To a certain extent, survival, let's take a look. Once you get a highly advanced human culture that has things like being able to recite poetry or wearing specific kinds of clothes, you're dealing with the cultural realm, which is not as directly impacted, arguably, or as, well, let me not go there. You're in the cultural realm, which isn't the strictly biological realm of, whether or not an animal is bigger, or if there are more in a pack that can bring down this animal and therefore eat or defend their territory. Now you're in the cultural realm. And that is a quote unquote intangible realm. But if you don't know how to do your hair the right way, or like the right music, or say the right things, reference the right cultural expressions and the rest, you might not get a girlfriend, and you might not get laid, and therefore you might not reproduce. So it hopefully will be apparent that moving up from the world of Mother Nature up into the realm of culture, we can see that though it isn't physical in the same way and has a different kind of bearing on, exerts a different kind of selective pressure, it's still something that's important. I would say that this business of the so-called intangible realm and the idea of marking ideas or laying claim to text and the rest is similarly an elevation of everything that I've been talking about in terms of survival value and animal species up into the cultural domain. Let's just leave that be. Hopefully it's clear what I'm getting at there. And let me look at my notes, because before I jump to the business of known, I want to make sure that there's not anything else in here. Sorry. Here. Yeah, I guess there's only one that I can talk, which is about the street signs and the rest. Yeah, I think it's time for me to basically take, before I get into the business of IP being known, I think I need to talk about the cultural value of control over how the environment is marked. And that means the environment itself as well as objects within it, right? So if I pick up a book, I gotta take a look at this Turkish grammar book that I'm looking at, I can take a look in here, and it's got Oxford indicating where it came from. That's like a mark of the creator in some respect, that being the press. And I can also go look in here and it'll say C.G. Lewis or whatever from 2000, whatever. And it says copyright, G.L. Lewis, 1967, and then a semicolon 2000, right? So it's been marked. And it also carries marks on it here to let you know where it came from. Sorry, that's not focusing. That being a little Oxford insignia, right? There are other types of marks on it, right? Like a URL and like a barcode and this other mark here. It's odd how there are all these different marks on here to let you know that it came from a particular place, and it bears the seals and markings that are so important in legal culture, as well as claims to territory and all the rest, right? You'll have lead bullae hanging off of ribbons off the bottom of some kind of charter that is then rolled up and put in a box that has painted on it the heraldic insignia of all the parties who agreed to the document within it. It's the same kind of thing. We see it going all the way back in human history to what are called sign accumulations on the steppes of Central Asia. When a group of people get together to agree to a certain thing, we don't know what the agreement was, but we can find standing stones that bear sets of marks wherein all of these people who agreed to different things, whether tribes or families or clans and the rest, you can see their marks on the stone, which indicates that they've all sort of signed on to what the thing is. So one of the ways in which the state exercising an influence on the environment in a way similar to what we were talking about in the Conrad Lorenz quote, where aggression and territorial markings serve to distribute the animals in such a fashion that everybody can get a piece of their resources, and so that aggression and violent intraspecific interactions are minimized. One of the ways the state does that is the IP laws, as A talked about a little bit in his last clip. Another way they do it is with the things like street signs, right? And I guess before I get to that, I have to talk about reliability. So let me come back around. As I said, this is a little bit disorganized because I'm still working on it in a book, and the IP aspect isn't the primary one that I was going to go after at first, but I wanted to jump in to point this out to people. So let me get over to the thing that is known and the idea of orientation. The vast majority of marks that animals encounter in their environment are reliable. Now, there are ways in which they can be made unreliable. Insects will create chemical signals that fake things in order to enslave or lay eggs in other types of animals, or to turn them into, in some sort of parasitic relationship. But for the most part, and very much so when you're talking about intraspecific, which means within a species, the marks have to be reliable because they serve these various functions that increase the survival likelihood. Interspecific, between species, you'll see dissimulation and falsehood used more commonly. The basic sort of principle that seems to undergird this is the idea that considered as a whole, the group of organisms want to perpetuate their existence. And so, whereas there might be a clear value or some more ambiguous trade-offs if you employ deception against other species, like a stick bug or a tiger being camouflaged to look like it's grass or whatever, there is value because it helps you take down your prey and the rest. But within species, there's a certain limit to how much of that is tolerated. And it's particularly the case with scent marks, because all of these marks that I'm talking about are marks in space, but a relatively small number of them, until you get to humans, are visible marks. Usually they're a scent mark, which is still a mark in space that can be detected, and it fires off place and border cells within the mind and has a relationship with the hippocampus and the rest in terms of orientation and memory. It functions just like a visible mark, but with animals, it's a scent mark. And because the scent mark is chemical, except in specific cases like the alamones, chiromones, these other kinds of things with the deceptive chemical signaling with insects, because it's a scent mark, you can't lie as easily with it. Because that animal can come up, a wolf coming up on another wolf's piss mark is going to know if it's female, if it's young, if it's old. It's going to know what it ate recently. It may know things about its health that we aren't even capable of understanding. The point being that it is difficult and more rare in terms of intraspecific communication for marks to be unreliable with animals, and that yields survival value because they can rely on the mark in their environment. They know that if they come up to this place and it's got heavy territorial marking here, that it's likely to be a contested border. And if they want to avoid a clash that could injure them and lead them to die and their offspring not to be cared for, that they go somewhere else. And again, it serves to distribute them across the biotope. So what's important is that you have reliable marks. That's critical to all of this. Now, we can see that extended vis-a-vis my talk about pushing it up from the level of biology and all that stuff going on in nature up into the cultural realm with humans. We can see the same sorts of things going on where they say, well, it's important that these marks be reliable, And so we're going to protect them in certain ways, right? So you can say with trademarks, if anybody were allowed to go put some Tylenol thing out there, then and put a Tylenol label on the bottle, you wouldn't know who it was that produced it. And there would be a risk that it could be adulterated. If you needed to sue, you wouldn't necessarily know who to go to because there was no correspondence between the mark and the mark maker. Fixing that relationship, much like a signature on the bottom of a page. If you put a signature on the bottom of a page, you want to know that it's that person. And to be doubly sure that we know it's that person, we put the signature and then we write the name under it. We also mark it with a date. So it's surrounded by sets of marks which fix the presence of the mark maker with this contract in time and space, and often have witnesses as well and the secondary signers, because it's important that it be reliable. We don't want a fake signature. That's a counterfeit signature. That's a violation of the law, right? Likewise, the state will control who can put up road signs and things. And it's important that the road signs be reliable. What happens if somebody comes along and switches the one-way sign and you're going down the wrong way, going the wrong way down the street? You know, you could have a head-on collision. What happens if some kids get drunk, as I've often talked about as an example, and take a street sign and rotate it 45 degrees? Now you don't know the names of the streets, and there can be disorientation. You can cause confusion and delay. It introduces disorientation. It introduces, because of that, the potential for conflict. Where are the primary conflict zones around the world? They are places where the border is contested. It's not clear. And that is where conflict is likely to occur. We can see it up in the high mountain reaches of India, where they come up against territory that China has seized. And there are many such examples, so that we see a clearly, like look at the Romans punishing you if you took a terminus, a boundary stone, and moved it, because it throws everything into chaos, right? That's where you have surveyors come out. This territory is yours, this is not. But all those human activities, from marking roadways to having strong penalties for moving boundary stones, they all go back to animal behavior. All of them emerge naturally and in a continuum from behavior that runs back down through animals and reptiles and amphibians all the way down to insects. And, you know, you got a bunch of libertarians who are showing up. Well, you know, ideally, if we were to say that this is the best way to do it, we could just simply dispense with all the other stuff and just throw it in here because we don't need these protections, right? I don't know that that's entirely fair to them, but that's the point I want to make, is that they sound like utopians. I mean, and to me, it almost makes me want to like reapply libtard in another category, because I just had never in my life heard people coming in and speaking as though they had no grounding in reality and millions of years of evolution on our planet that led us to use marks for survival value, directly relating to territory, property, and resources. They're just like, oh, well, we can just throw that out the window, or it's already taken care of. It's fraud. Is it? We'd have to look closely at fraud. And I'm not sure that all the people making claims about fraud have done so. So anyway, if you remove intellectual property protections, you introduce some issues with orientation and the reliability of the marks that we use in our environment to orient. If you pick up a compass and then, you know, you're trying to take a compass bearing, and you've got your plate carrier and all your magazines next to you, and you got a rifle on, you got a bunch of metal next to you as you're trying to take a bearing, you got to take all that crap off and get a clean reading. And if you don't, once you get your azimuth and you're heading out through the woods, it's just like when you move a barrel when you're trying to sight something. The further out it goes, the more you're off the mark, just as a property of how geometry works, you know. The smallest introductions of uncertainty and unreliability into the marked environment have cascading series of issues that come down over time. And they tend to cause and introduce disorientation, delay, and conflict. You know, you have introduced confusion and delay, or however that damn line goes with AA's train thing. So hopefully the general picture is bearing out here. I think what I'm probably going to hear is that nobody has any problems with the general picture. They're just going to come back to me later and say that's not what we were talking about, which I would take exception to, because the whole idea that, for example, you don't have copyright, you don't have a way to associate your name with a product, and the fruits of it and the rest is important. So let's jump over about this idea of the importance of known, of a thing being known, about being able to orient within your environment. We've already covered that, how it has survival value, how it runs across species, and how that whole framework that we're talking about in terms of biology and nature gets leveled up into the realm of culture and ideas for human beings. And that same idea of marking, with a few variations, gets carried over to that place. The first thing I want to cover is this idea that there is any property that is intangible. It's absolutely preposterous. I've never heard anything more ridiculous in my life. If it can be protected through existing IP laws, it must be commemorated. It must be set forth in a certain form, and then have like the stamp of the clerk or the stamp of the patent office. Weird how it's all these stamps that show authority, that show that there was an actual relationship between that clerk looking at it at a certain time, and a date stamp, which corresponds to a scent mark, becoming less effective over time as it fades. Weird how there are all these correspondences that just directly relate. These things, all of this is there for a reason to keep us from having problems. And this idea that there is something that is intangible is nonsense. Whatever is intangible can only be seen, agreed upon, signed off on, filed with the clerk, stamped, put in triplicate in a folder, and have a copy mailed to you and emailed to you as well, and scanned and digitized. All that can only happen if it's been made manifest. That's what we have in courts. They talk about like facts, right? Well, how do you establish something as a fact? Do you have video showing it? And do you have witnesses talking about it? And have you hammered through it? Has it been adjudicated? You know, that is a thing that is fact. Our entire legal system requires things that are facts or documented. I mean, when you get into mens rea and you get into intent, it can get a little bit funky, but the core of the system is the idea of things that can be attested. That's why we want witnesses. That's why we talk about things like proof. So anything in the IP realm that is given any sort of protection at all, it happens when it's created. Like I enjoy copyright protection for anything that I write from the moment it's written. Now it helps if, for example, I've taken a screenplay and filed it with the Writers Guild of America West, or the old trick that they used to say for copyright, which is where you fold up a copy of whatever you want to prove that was yours, and you put it in the mail and mail it to yourself, so it has a U.S. postmark on it indicating the date at which it was written. These kinds of things. The fact is that there is a manifest material thing. Now, if somebody wants to come in and say that, what's his name, Mickey Mouse, is intangible because, it's the character in these various situations. No, what's important is the fact that Mickey Mouse was created, can be seen, exhibits can be shown in court, and there are ways of, everybody knows what Mickey Mouse is because we can come and show you the film that he first made. You go, take a look at Steamboat Willie, right? George R.R. Martin has drafts that he can show, and they're dated. Those are the things that have protection. To whatever extent you say you can't do that Mickey Mouse over there, it's based on the fact that someone else has done so in such a way that is tangible and fixed in time and space. It can be dated, it can be attested, it can be verified. So the idea that it's intangible is sort of a game. It's I've just seen no evidence of anything that's intangible, because if you came into court and said, I want to protect my such and such, they'd say, show me your such and such. If you can't show it to me, it doesn't exist. I must see what it is. It must be commemorated and fixed with a date and a location and a person, generally through marks, like a signature or a stamp or a date stamp, or even with the digital world, the cron is the date stamp, which corresponds roughly to the scent mark losing its value over time, fixing it with a date, or like a tag that you stick on the back of a license plate that you have to upgrade every year that fixes the date thing. It's like you renewed your piss mark on the tree. So that's another thing that I just wanted to throw off to the wind, which is just crazy, this idea that it's intangible, that there's anything intangible that's under discussion here. To whatever extent it's intangible, that extent is precisely the extent to which it has no protection. In a court of law, it must be shown, it must be established. I don't know how many of you have been through lawsuits. I have. And it's a core aspect of all our legal traditions, at least certainly in the West. Okay, another thing I wanted to cover, and this is a thing that I felt like AA got wrong. Generally, love AA, praise AA, even though he's not a particularly lovable person, somehow that makes him much more lovable. Praise AA, just because his native instinct said, screw this nonsense, right? I'm with him in his general picture. However, he seems to think that there are good ideas. That the scarcity is with good ideas. There's this whole idea of scarcity that he wants to come at this with. And scarcity just seems to me to be crazy. There is no scarcity of ideas. And I've worked in marketing and advertising forever. I've also worked in new product development. And I came up during the .com period when everybody was coming up with a new app. People literally shit out good ideas endlessly. There is no scarcity, not only of ideas, there is no scarcity of good ideas, especially when you factor in the idea that many people will come up with something that, they don't even see the full implications of. But another who comes along says, wow, that is a good idea, and you didn't even recognize it. There is no shortage of good ideas. Like the app my friend came up with one time that I mentioned before called Bloodhound. How great would it be to have an app on your phone where you could just look at your telephone and you'd be like, oh, the alert just went off. That means my wife has just finished ovulation. So the honeymoon phase is over. And it looks like we're going to be moving into the premenstrual thing. Okay, my indicator just said that I should go ahead. It auto ordered flowers for me. And whenever I begin to speak, my little Bluetooth headpiece says, shut up, right? That's a great app. That could work out great. That's a great idea. And like so many other great ideas, it's doomed to die in childbirth because there's nothing more common than great ideas and nobody cares. So when you take a look at a thing, and this is all going to come back around, people, bear with me. I realize that many people are going to be going, what the fuck is he talking about? This comes back around to the idea of reliable environmental indicators. What's important isn't good ideas. That's not what's scarce. What's scarce is reliable environmental indicators. Let me say that again. What's scarce is not ideas, not good ideas. It's reliable environmental indicators, which means something in your environment that you can trust as being what it says it is as a basis for making behavioral determinations. That's what matters. So when we take a look at the real value of a lot of this IP, it has nothing to do with scarcity. Come on, Walt Disney, whatever. Mickey Mouse, who fucking cares? What matters about Mickey Mouse is Mickey Mouse got traction. Mickey Mouse got uptake. Mickey Mouse went somewhere. And a very large proportion of whether or not that happens or not has nothing to do with whether it's a good idea. Nothing. Like it's laughable to think that it's only that Mickey Mouse had a great idea. It was a great idea. It's ridiculous. A large portion of it is access, whether you can force that access, whether you can create traction for yourself over time and not go under in childbirth of your business, or whether or not the dwellers on the threshold, the controllers of, whether or not your peer-reviewed article gets accepted, or whether or not your script gets circulated in Hollywood, whether those dwellers on the threshold will allow it to get through. And because it's so rare that anything gets through, because it's so hard to judge, because it has so much to do with luck, because it has so much to do with persistence, because it has so much to do with access and many other things that are very difficult to quantify, the most valuable thing is not a fucking good idea. It's something that made it. And what do I mean when I say something that made it? I mean something that came to be known. Look at the etymology of terms like noble, right? Gignosco, known, gnosis. They all go back to the same root of the idea that a noble family is a family that is known. How does it come to be known? There are all sorts of vicissitudes involved in attempting to become known. That's why so many, Viking warriors or, Romans of consular rank or fill in the fucking blank struggled their entire life to be recognized and to reach that apex to where they are recognized and understood, that their fame would live through the ages. That's why everybody's going to be like, well, Alexander seemed like a little bit of an asshole. He ended up in Babylon there. He started to take up their customs. He pissed off his generals and everything else. But you can't take Alexander's fama, the fact that he is known, away from him. That is what has value. The scarcity isn't in fucking good ideas. The scarcity lies in whether or not something has become famous, something has become well known. That is what is valuable. And I can speak directly from my experience with a trademark and the rest. Talk to anybody. If you brought Pharaoh on a stream and just said, Pharaoh, how important is a brand? He'd be like, well, of course a brand is incredibly important. It's the most important asset of any company is their brand and their brand recognition. Weird how they say recognition. Recognition. And you know what another thing is? That brand can be trusted. Why do you think Tylenol put all kinds of seals on their bottles and stuff and like freaked out and proactively came after it? It wasn't just liability and lawsuits, though that mattered too. It was that their brand, they were about to lose control of their brand. Why has Disney been so concerned up until recently with consistency in what they offer with their brands? Why up until recently, I mean, in the broad scheme of things, it's been a while, but still, relative to when Star Wars first appeared, it's recently. Why up until recently, was Star Wars so focused on maintaining the quality of their characters and not letting anyone else fool with them? It's so that they corresponded to what they are supposed to be, what they have come to be known as. Now, we are in a very specific, difficult situation now as regards the business with leftists taking over everything, like the Tolkien Society or all the woke crap with Star Wars and the rest. And we're about to see how badly everything's going to break down with that, because what they've essentially done is said there's no relationship between signifier and signified. We can just drive a wedge between what something seems to be and what it's always been thought to be, right? We can change it because it's all based on language and we're all a tabula rasa, and we can say that, no, we used to say the N word and then we said Negro, which is pretty much the N word and it's just from the Latin root that means black. And then, no, we shouldn't say that. What we should say is colored people. But then we're like, colored people is bad. What we should instead say is people of color. Like it's nonsense. It's addlepated, utopian, shitbird nonsense. And they have introduced that uncertainty everywhere. At Disney, with the Star Wars franchise, with everything. I joke that it's only going to be a certain amount of time before we see that books changed, updated to meet the changing needs of readers as they arise, because they're going to start removing text from shit. And all of these things that formerly were known and therefore served as points of orientation in our environment will be flushed. There will be no ability to rely upon something that formerly was reliable. And that yields a problem in terms of the ability to make behavioral determinations based upon the signs and indicators in our environment. Now, this is something I'm going to be digging into very deeply with my book. And it only partially bears on the thing of intellectual property. But I want to make sure that everybody is hearing what I'm talking about, because they're basically the commie scum, however construed, are basically rolling through every aspect of our culture and just dropping their trousers and squirting shit all over everything. They want to make it so that there is no fixed point of orientation anywhere, because they're upending all fixed points of orientation. If you think about the tall tree that got hit by lightning that we use to navigate, or the stone in the field in The Secret of Nim, where you're supposed to set up in the lee of the stone, right? Or you think about any number of these things that we use to orient ourselves with. There's a reason that they're there. Once upon a time in the ancient world, we had gnomons. I've talked about this before, so some of you have heard this in the past. You had a gnomon. It's a big thing sticking up, right? Like you see in the center of... many of them come from Egypt. You see them put up, for example, at the Hippodrome in Istanbul. Constantinople. That's a point of orientation. How do you know it's a point of orientation? Because no matter where anybody standing around it is, they can see the shadow marked on the ground, which is rather like a sundial and indicates the passage of time. Or you can look at it against the stars in the sky and thereby orient. This matters when you're trying to do things like business, right? There's a variation of it that was used in the Christian world. It's the clock tower. And the bells ring a certain number of times, you know, they'll indicate Vespers or Matin or whatever it is, right? So you'll know that there are these times of prayer, and following this prayer, you agreed to meet so-and-so, the Florentine banker, in such and such a piazza, right? You have the same thing, oddly, gnomon, clock tower, minaret, jutting up from the ground. Odd how these things, you know, correspond, and they're all landmarks, which are based on orientation. You have the minaret with prayer 5 times a day. And I can't remember what the expression was in Turkish, but there was something about the afternoon. God, I can't remember what the expression was, but it was a weird way that they phrased it. It was something like the top of the afternoon or the head of the afternoon. I can't remember what it was. And it was only after I learned that that indicates the time immediately following X prayer that I began to understand. All these things serve to organize and integrate our behavior, just like aggression and territorial markings distribute animals across a biotope in space. And the fundamental feature of it that allows us to organize, like to have a fair day on a certain day of the week, or to meet at a certain time, which grows ever more precise, is having reliable indicators in time and space. Now, much of our society comes down to similar things beyond the idea of meeting on a market day or in a particular place at a given time. There's also the idea that you want to be able to rely upon a signature as being that person's. You want to rely upon a product as having come from a particular place. You know, you want to rely upon something that was published by a given publisher, because then you have recourse if there was a libel. Who are you going to fucking sue, right? You want to have recourse, for example, if you get bad pills. But if there's no intellectual property protections, you're just like, well, that's fraud. Fraud involves the ability of being able to prove damage and the rest, which sort of allows it to go a step. Basically, as I understand it, under the umbrella of fraud, at least criminal fraud, there may be aspects of it in terms of civil fraud that I'm not familiar with. I'm not a lawyer. But as I understand it, one of the important things is that you have to be able to prove harm and damages. And there is an enormous gray area, an enormous margin for error if you're just relying on fraud when it comes to being able to rely on your environmental marks, whether those be indication of authorship, where something comes from originally, who actually manufactured something. I mean, just look at the realm of ideas. If your culture does not focus specifically on tracking who created something, where it came from, how it came into existence, you run into all kinds of problems. There's a reason that the hadith came up in the Muslim tradition, because they're like, oh, wait a minute. You're saying that the prophet said something? Well, now you need to show me that Abu so-and-so heard it from Imam such and such, and it goes all the way down to Ali, the fourth of the rightly guided caliphs and the last, you know, in order for me to be able to prove a chain of descent that it went all the way back to this thing. Because there is nothing more important than my religion and my culture. And if you're going to make a claim, I have to be able to attribute it and trace it back through time. So it's not just legal recourse. It's not just preventing violence, like distributing people across a biotope. It's also in that place where we've elevated the business of nature and biology up into the realm of human culture. There we want to know where something came from. Why do you think it is that I mean, if we didn't have copyright law, how do we approach the idea of citations? How do we approach the idea of looking back, you know, often, I'll grant you, as through a glass darkly, at who drafted the given idea the first time and how it was picked up by so-and-so and how it was carried forward? You know, I heard AA talking about how authorship appeared at as a concept at a particular time, and love you, AA, truly. Love watching your show. Best on YouTube. Best on YouTube. However, it's nonsense. If we didn't have the idea of authorship, where did Pseudographia come from? Why do we have people who have since been identified as pseudo-Cicero, like the ad horennium as opposed to de oratore, right? Where did that come from? Why are people still arguing over whether or not the some book on an angelic hierarchy was really written by Dionysius the Areopagite, or whether or not it's Pseudographia. Why would Pseudographia have appeared in the first place if there was not value, if there was not literally authority, auctoritas, associated with putting a given work under a given author's name? Why is it that author and authority are etymologically tied at the hip, like fucking Siamese twins? So the idea, I'm going off on a million different tangents because there's so many pieces of this, but the idea is that even in the realm of things that people think aren't particularly important, are not particularly important, like copyright law. Well, we don't need copyright. Everybody should be able to print everything, and it'd be fraud if you put something out under my name. How would it be fraud? If you got rid of the idea of copyright, there is nothing to prevent you from claiming it as your own. And if anybody can claim anything as their own, how is it that putting any kind of name on anything is fraud? If there's no copyright law, how do you distinguish between saying, okay, well, you can't sign it with my name? I'll be like, my book is my book is actually sort of it's a game I'm playing, and it wasn't by Thomas Carlyle. Actually, what it is that I'm pretending this book is by a character named Thomas Carlyle, and so I put Thomas Carlyle at the bottom, and they're like, well, you can't do. It's not fraud if there is no desire to attribute a chain of ownership of where the thing originally came from. There are two ways, there are two forms in which our writing first arose. The primary one is within the context of accounting. You find that in ancient Egypt, you find that in Mesopotamia, and you find it with the earliest European texts that have been deciphered, Linear B by Ventris, right? It's accounting. These are people, bean counters, marking things on tablets because they need to know what they have. And there's a direct correspondence between, how do I say this? Their accounting is only valuable insofar as it corresponds to what's actually there. So from the very first appearance of our writing, which you will recall, I am tying back to the origins with animal behavior and environmental resource and territorial marking, the whole thing of it having any value is that it is a predication that can be relied upon. Look, this is one of the things that I hammered on early on when I was into this whole subject, and started looking at very, very early on when I was starting to figure all this stuff out. One of the most fundamental grammatical sort of ways that we look at things in our written and spoken language is the idea of a subject and a predicate. That's sort of the most fundamental thing that you can sort of think about. Certainly in English, I would guess that it's more or less the same, even in a highly declined language like German, across Indo-European languages. There is what is said, the predicate, and then there is that thing about which it is said, which is the subject. Latin predicare goes back to the idea of to proclaim publicly. It's a statement that is made. The subject goes back to subject, sub-yugum, right? Yoke, also yuga, interestingly. It's the idea of being placed beneath the yoke, being yoked by something, bound by something. A thing is made subject at the moment that anything is predicated about it. That understanding goes back to an animal pissing on a tree to mark it, to a food cache being marked, to territory being marked. The territory is made subject by the act of predicating something about it, which is the fact that, for example, I, the white tiger who urinates on this tree branch, owns this thing. Subject and predicate. All across this elevated realm of human culture, which corresponds to biology, what's most important is to have a reliable indicator of where a thing came from, because without it, everything breaks down. Take a look at signatures. If you can't rely on a signature, you're screwed. Don't believe that a signature was originally a non-linguistic mark? Take a look at how your little kids take a handprint and stick it on a piece of paper. And that indicates them. That's the first signature. You'll see it on the walls of places like Chauvet and Lascaux, where they put their hands on the wall and they take a reed and they blow, apparently, it is thought, ochre pigment around their hand to show that that's them. You want to check if it's really them? Put their hand up on it and see if it matches. You take a look at how you have the business of a signature. And on a signature card, you have the signature and then you write your name under it. Because very often the signature itself is supposed to be illegible. So it's harder to fake, so that it is more reliable as an indicator that you are the person there who signed the thing and made it work. These things have value. These things are important. Look at fiat currency. Fiat currency is one of these things that has no value other than the fact that the government says, I promise you, I'll pay you for what it's worth, but don't pay attention while I go print a shitload more of it so it's worth nothing, right? This is literally a piece of paper that has no value other than the market bears. And if you think that that being able to rely upon immaterial indicators has no value, try printing counterfeit currency. The Department of the Treasury will send out people in black SUVs with tinted windows and submachine guns under their suit coats, which are also Kevlar, to visit you if you try to print something like counterfeit currency. Now, they don't do it with the Copyright Office, but they should, because all of that holds us together. The ability to know that a given thing came from a given place, a certain person is the creator of it. It's not intangible because in every case where it can receive legal protection, it has had to be made tangible to file for protections for that thing. Everybody's off in la la land. So anyway, I think I've covered the primary stuff. I want to have some time to answer questions from people, but let me take a look here and see what I've missed. At the outset, I told you that I would take a look at the idea of the animal marking background. I think I did that. I told you that I would talk about the extension of nature into culture. I think I covered that. I mentioned to you that I would talk about this. The real value of IP is that it is known. It has nothing to do with the idea that good ideas are scarce. The only thing more common than good ideas is bad ideas, and both of them are like grains of sand upon all the beaches of the world. What is valuable is things that are known, that have somehow fought through that most competitive and difficult of arenas and come to be simply known by other people. If that was not the case, celebrities wouldn't have their value. You can talk all day long about marketing. You could bring Farrell on for this because I'm sure he knows. Celebrity endorsement is still the most powerful thing out there. Why? Because the celebrity is known. The person looks and goes, well, do I know that guy? Oh, I know that face. I mean, shit, it's so powerful that you'll see the institution of a particular look that is archetypal over time. There's that guy, my name is Uhtred of Bebbenburg, and I am part of this whatever, the last kingdom of whatever, where I'm talking about Alfred. They brought this German guy in who's supposed to be some warrior. You know what he is, other than stupid for having a sword on his back, which no one ever did? He's a Brad Pitt ripoff. They just brought his face in because it looks similar. Look at, for example, Steve Buscemi and Peter Lorre. These faces are known. They are thought of as archetypal in some respect. And to whatever extent they gain traction, to whatever extent they become known, they have value. If you don't think celebrities have the uber value, then think about why they're wrapped so tightly round with contracts and all the rest. And you know, how often do you see celebrities go off the fucking reservation? How often? I don't see it often. And the ones that I do see go off the reservation are way down at the bottom level. Way like, whatever, I can't even remember some of the ones who've appeared on Fox recently, but let's just say Kevin Sorbo or something, like people who don't matter. Why is it that there is an absolute fixed shield wall when it comes to all celebrities? There's almost none. The one that you can come up with is what's his name, Brad Pitt's former wife's dad, and he's still sort of a They are wrapped around with every kind of control that we never hear about. I am convinced. Can't prove it, but it's because of everybody knows how powerful they are. Everybody knows how powerful their endorsement is. Everybody knows that that is true intellectual property, which means before anybody with any studio, anybody who controls any distribution and production budgets, they're going to lock those motherfuckers down. Their peckers are going to be hanging in like 16 different bear traps before they're allowed to get anywhere, because everybody who matters knows that those celebrities matter. If you had some big name come out and actually say something that wasn't scripted for them, they would fucking disappear. And I mean that makes Scientology look like the least of the ones who are, you know, wrapped around with wickets and the rest. So it's all about frame of reference. It's all about a point of orientation. It's all about being known. That is the thing that is most important. So anyway, I covered that. I would say, I hope it's been carried across the finish line here, that the commerce and the commercial considerations are contingent. They're way down the line of concerns that we have to be worried about. And hopefully I've addressed this issue of the putative immateriality. So let me just look over these things. While I'm looking over, I'm going to give the last few things that are floating here, and then I will begin to take questions. So think of good questions with the time that we have remaining, and load them up. Actually, let me go ahead and set up this pop-out chat so I can properly see them. This should be, go ahead and, excuse me, go ahead and mark them with @semiagog so that I can see them. And I will attempt to deal with all the naysayers, midwits, and low IQ people who refuse, for reasons that are far beyond me, to recognize my genius. So yeah, as you guys are putting those together, I'm going to roll through here and see what else I missed. I've already dealt with the material, non-physical. Yeah, I just wanted to say about that business of constantly referring to these things as though they're immaterial and they're not physical. It's just absurd. Just all of you shut up. I've already explained that it is entirely material because it can only be defended to the extent that it has been commemorated in some fashion that can be recognized at law. Talking about it as though there is still anything that's immaterial is absurd. So AA even saying, well, where it's like homesteading the Platonic ideals. No, it isn't. What's known is known because it's out there. To the extent that it's known, it has value. And to the extent that it's known, it can be shown that this existed before that and therefore deserves legal protection. Coming up with, approaching it in any fashion where you claim that it's immaterial is like astronomers trying to come up with crazy, complex computation to deal with their belief that the Earth is at the center of the universe. You can come up with math that's Ptolemaic rather than Copernican, but you're going to have weird shit in it, like talking about how, you know, Mercury is moving backwards in retrograde. It's nonsense. Here's another thing. Look at contracts. Are contracts material? Yeah, in that they're written and everybody can read it and then sign it. And you know what? A verbal agreement doesn't hold up worth a damn compared to a written one. Is the contract immaterial? No. It's material to the extent that it's written down and two people sign it. The marks are what matter. The marks are what make it material. We've already talked about the thing that the brand is the most important thing. I wanted to bring up mind share about that, because to say that's a marketing term that Farrell will know, but other people won't know. You talk about how much mind share you have, which means how much of a beachhead do you have in the consciousness and awareness of the person that you're dealing with. All of these different things, again, has nothing to do with scarcity of ideas, good or bad. It's how much mind share, by luck, good fortune, circumstance, or cunning, a given intellectual property has been able to seize and hold with an average member of the viewing public. That's what has value, the mind share. In terms of tangible versus intangible, I could have gone into the distinction between house as a physical object and home as a feeling about it. You know, you can say that home is an intangible thing, but home doesn't exist without a house. Likewise, with all these things about IP that everybody claims, you know, are immaterial. No, they're material, because if they weren't, they couldn't. Let's put it this way. Anything about IP that isn't material, that hasn't been made material, can't be defended in court, so shut up. The brand is the most valuable part of a company. Let's see. Yeah, about AA had been talking about why IP rights are good at all. He mentioned that if they weren't protected, Mickey would be abused and debased. No, it's that Mickey would become inconsistent and incomprehensible. He would no longer be known, and therefore he would no longer correspond to what is known, and therefore would no longer serve as a point of orientation for the integration of behavior. You don't know what you're going to get with Mickey, which means you're not sure you want to bring your kids to the event, which means sales drop. And that's what I was touching on earlier when I mentioned that we have yet to see. There's some recent things. It's almost like anybody under the age of 35, say 36, because it should be divisible by 12. Anybody under the age of 36 is not allowed to come and tell me anything about anything, because you didn't live in a time that wasn't insane. We're going to see what's going on with Star Wars being rewritten as woke crap. We're going to see how far they can carry astroturfing it. It remains to be seen, because if I'm right, there are a number of things that are going to fall apart much sooner than later. Anyway, the issue is that it's not that Mickey would become abused and debased. It's that we wouldn't know what the hell Mickey is. We don't know anymore. And that's happening increasingly with all of these franchises. Another thing that got brought up, and this I don't fully have an answer for, and some people, I had noted this, and then I was happy to see that when I was listening to the AA Gold live stream that some other people brought it up, is that the distortions, the disorientations, the lack of a clear corresponding value in much of this that we're discussing, it can take place under existing IP regimes where somebody's already the owner. That's exactly what's happening with Disney right now. That's exactly what's happening with Star Wars. I mean, at this point, I'm not sure that fan fiction Star Wars, I mean, let's say, I'm not sure that fan fiction Star Wars written 10 or 15 years ago wouldn't be much better than approved, you know, under the IP umbrella Star Wars that's being created today. And I think part of that problem is because none of the people who, or the majority of the people who are quote unquote defending their brands, they've lost sight of what all of that is about. And I think that's frankly because people like Soros and others come along, many, 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 many others whose names we don't know, who operate through advertising agencies or capital and investment firms. And they come along and they say, look, what are you in business for? Let's just ask, what are you in business for? What you're in business for is how much money you make at the end of the day. Now, previously, you thought defending your brand was the most important thing about your business. But allow me to explain to you that it's not exactly about defending your brand that's the most important part. The most important part is how much you carry home every day. So how about you and me, we make an agreement. I'll pay you twice, 3 times what you've made before. Instead, what we'll do is your business will become a new thing. It will become activism, which means it's not as important what the given character is supposed to do or what he's done before and, you know, previous iterations. What's important is pushing our message. Your business is no longer your business. Now, I'm exaggerating. There are many groups involved with this, but you get the point. There's something weird going on now where all the corrective features of the quote unquote free market and how punishment is supposed to be brought to bear on those who don't deliver a reliable product, everything's been thrown up in the air. It's all disorientation. All the points of reference are gone. So at this point, anybody who comes in and likes to throw some strictly libertarian view of how the free market will be self-correcting, we're so far past that now that and I don't know how long it's going to last because it can't last forever, that we can't really know whether or not Anyway, you get the point. I covered it. I'll go too far down that road trying to make it clear when it's not even clear enough at this point in my head. But I offer it to you people as an unfinished whatever, there it is. Hopefully good questions are coming. I've already covered that. That was the thing about the that's what I was going for. I've now had 2 of these damn whiskeys. Forgive me. The business of how this distortion can take place under existing IP regimes. And that goes in a couple directions. One is that everything that I'm complaining about, if you remove IP, yes, it can still happen under existing IP. I realize that. Likewise, there are ways to change the existing IP regimes and yield a better result. And right now, we can't even know what's going on because it's being so screwed with behind the scenes. That I'll grant. So scarcity, we already covered. Anything else here? I'm not going to go into this business of how you have to go to court to change your name. Why? Because you need to be reliably you, and it needs to be recorded and stamped and marked and documented. Why you have to change your signature card, if you change your signature. Looking at Japanese mon, the seals that they carry. Japanese people, for those of you who don't know, they don't sign their names. They carry a seal and they stamp it. And they have to protect that seal because if they lose it, it's like anybody else can sign for them. There's a reason they protect it because there must be correspondence between the signifier and the signified. Orientation, in closing, is the utilitarian argument. To whatever extent that you can no longer trust that it came from this person or from this place, you're lost. Societies they function based on this behavioral integration, which is why I talked about gnomon, which establishes a center, a bell tower, which establishes a way to integrate your behavior in time and space. The minaret that establishes an integration of behavior in time and space. It's physical and it also marks time. Likewise, your signatures have to be reliable. Likewise, your currency has to be reliable. People who come in and say that, well, we could just get rid of all IP protections and it'd just be fraud. I'm not so sure about that. Attribution is authority. Authority has existed for quite some time. Authorship didn't just appear in the early 18th century. I already covered state-controlled outdoor ads and street signs, orientation. Oh, the last thing. Everybody's like, well, it must be physical. And what's his name? Kissler? I can't remember what his damn name was, but he's the guy that Radlib was quoting as making the argument about physical property and the rest. And it's like, you got to have physical property with physical boundaries. What physical boundaries? The physical boundaries only exist insofar as they are marked. And those marks fade with time. It's a fiction. A marked border is a fiction. Yeah, you can say that the Great Wall of China border is still there. The wall is crumbling. But look at it in a million years. It's a social, conventional fiction. All of it is a social, conventional fiction. So you can simultaneously say that nothing is immaterial if it can be admitted at the court of law, leaving aside weird shit like mens rea. We'll leave that aside. You can also say that everything is immaterial and always already has been immaterial. So this like physical versus, immaterial distinction is just for the birds, man. I'm not even an economist, and I'm just looking at all the stuff that's dragged out by the so-called authorities in this respect. And I'm like, did anybody bother to think for themselves? I'm sorry that this whole subject is going to be new to a lot of people, but it's because it's mine. It's my focus. I published on it. Many others haven't. There are a few about 3,000 years ago in China, and then one Italian guy with, about a paragraph and a few footnotes in the 1970s. One German who looked at prehistoric behavior. They're very, very few, and nobody's carried it to the extent I have. It's the basic idea that writing came before speech. We inherited it from animals. It's a very, very radical idea because of religions of the book and the way in which language is privileged, and especially because of the business of all these damn commie bitches coming along and saying that everything's arbitrary, we're all a tabula rasa, language is conventional, so we can just swap out words and meanings at will. But underneath it is actually a structure and a framework that's locked into time and space that we're concerned about. All other species are too, because it has survival value. And that's what we have to come back to: a real hierarchy, real territory, and all the rest. And it's only going to come when we are able to fix things in time and space and rely on these markings. And IP comes down to something that was carried up from the animal level into the realm of culture, where we attempted to fix these points of orientation and knowing who the author was, who can be held responsible, who can be sued for libel, whose formulation for the pharmaceutical was screwy so that they can be sued, who is in copyright violation so that these authors can stay alive. That's what matters. And that is sadly what I think is missed by most of the anti-IP people. So I'm here for the questions. Thank you for bearing with me all this time, people. And I will come back through here to the first instance I can see of a semiagog question. Okay. Most of it looks like people are just shitting on me. Let's see. Now I get to suffer like AA did in his last little live stream over on AA Gold. It's only fitting. Get to the first question here. You guys can lay it on me. This from King Salmonfish. Semiagog, what do you think about the relevance of cultural narrative being reliable for behavior in the same way as Marx? We can even observe the various faction markings: red hat, blue hair. Are you saying that it should be important that a person wearing a red Trump cap is actually a real Trump supporter? Yes, because then you can determine whether you can fix your friend-enemy distinctions. Unfortunately, that kind of granular control, you step into sumptuary laws and the rest, which haven't been popular for quite some time. In my most reactionary moments, I almost like the idea of sumptuary laws, so we're not going to get into that. The problem is, as soon as you talk about what people must wear and must not wear, they're going to start talking about yellow stars, and you'll be screwed. But yes, generally speaking, the whole idea of, is what I'm looking at what it actually is? Yeah, that matters in all domains of life. I mean, think about somebody in a wedding ceremony who says, I do, except they didn't. I mean, yeah, we want that everywhere. We also have to recognize that there is no utopian, heavenly Jerusalem in which we're all going to arrive. There's no more Kakian Tainlorn in which we'll find peace. Human beings are going to be shitty and unreliable. However, where we have managed to carve out certain protections, however imperfect, I would recommend that we attempt to perfect them, realizing they will never be perfect. We should attempt to perfect what we move forward with, rather than to dispense it with a bunch of commie programmers who want to, everything's open source. Yeah, so they mix so many things up, right? Like attribution is a part of ownership, right? With like Creative Commons licenses and the rest, and they act like it's not because it doesn't have commerce associated with it, but attribution matters. They mix so many parts together. They talk about like open source. Well, there's a difference between being able to see the code versus being able to just take it and use it at will. So they have thereby bound it together. They're saying, well, we'll let you see what we're using as long as there's no ownership. We'll dispense with secrecy, but in exchange for communism. Like, there's so much shit going on behind the scenes with this stuff that I hate. All right. Central Academic Agency says, does Semiagog have cancer? I hope he's okay. No, I just didn't feel like doing my hair up, so I just put a hat on, man. And it helps because I got my AC on inside and it's a little bit cold. I got to keep my head warm. It's a sleepy cap. Do I have cancer? Not yet, anyway. My name is Mud, said Semiagog, the market will fix it, bro. Yeah. Adam Alexander says, Semiagog, having come from the ANCAP sphere, I tend to view copyright trademark as very different from patents. I view copyright trademark as legitimate, but institution of patents is for the most part illegitimate. I'll keep an open mind about it. I'll keep an open mind about everything as long as everyone understands that you have to be able to fix a thing with its point of origin. And a lot of the people who are talking about, well, fraud takes care of it, I don't think they've looked enough into fraud law, because there is a bar in terms of having standing, whether civil or criminal. Whereas the idea that there's just a flat out law across the board that says my creations are associated with me here and forevermore, and at a minimum in terms of attribution are protected, that matters. I mean, you're trying to figure out where a bad idea for humanity came from. You want to be able to go dig through, Nietzsche's papers or Stirner's or Hegel's or Feuerbach's or Bruno Bauer's. You want to know. And as soon as you start playing games with copyrights, trust me, I'm not saying all solutions to existing intellectual property laws would eventuate in this way. However, many of these just all throw it up in the air. Oh, encompassed again. Nobody owns anything. Everybody owns everything. From each according to his ability, to each according to his need, is going to screw a lot of that. And it's something that is hard fought, that we have finally arrived at. And I would prefer not to throw the baby out with the bathwater based upon what millennials and younger, who've never lived in a society that wasn't 100% psychopathic, recommend in terms of solutions. Forgive me, but they're just, now I'm old and I've been around long enough. I've played the rebellious younger person. I've seen it. I understand their point of view, and it's justified in many respects. But now I'm older, so shut the fuck up and listen to your elders. There's a great deal that we have fought for, that a bunch of innovative rebuilders, reimaginers will come up with. That just fuck off, man. Anyway, King Salmon Fish again. I've already answered one by him. I want to get to wait a minute. No, it just reloaded. What the fuck? All right, this is falling apart quick, people. If I can't get this question thing going here reasonably well, I'm just going to bail so you don't have to suffer through more. I was hoping that I would see more people taking specific issue with specific points I raised. Maybe that's further on and not marked with a semiagog. King Salmonfish, have you heard that the copyright system is owned by the Queen of England and that opening mail with an all caps name is an international crime because it's a corporate? No, I haven't heard that. Matthew Daniel says, hail AA, hail Semigog. I'm not big into the hails, but thanks, I guess. Minoan Funk Finger said, nice presentation, Semigog. Thank you. John Ski said, Semigog, Disney copywriting Loki, is he not an ancient Norse god? Yeah, we should be all over that. Everybody should be all over that. There's a book called Who Owns Native Culture? And it's a crappy left-wing book, but I was looking into it back in the day because this is constantly going on. They will create some sort of packaged vehicle that's a reinterpretation. Like, think about somebody coming along like, I think it was Volkswagen who came up with the Touareg. Like, I'm way further over onto the right now, so I don't care. But back in the day, I was thinking to myself, Touareg, that's the name of the people. That's the blue people of North Africa. How is it that Volkswagen can just come along and take their name to sell a fucking car? Like, imagine if somebody came up to one of you and it's like, well, Mr. John Ski, we're going to put together this really crappy Yugoslavian two-seater, and we're going to call it the John Ski. And you're like, fuck you, what? Like, there are real problems. And yeah, I think that there is the business with Loki and the rest is one of those. People should go after them for that. It should be established. There is a way to do it if lawyers would get on it. The thing is, what are they going to get for their prize? They're not going to go to work on something that doesn't make them a lot of money, and then a very distant second get them laid. They're certainly not going to go near anything that looks reactionary or it's going to make them look bad. You have to make the case for the lawyers regarding why they should go make the case for the courts. But yeah, this Loki shit is just another one of these problems. Robin Watertree says, can you address the idea the copyright is an unwarranted restriction on others' property? I could attempt to, if you laid it out better for me. I mean, existing copyright law precludes, you can't claim copyright on something you've plagiarized. So I'm not sure. Again, these things need reform. They're real problems. Most of the time, when somebody wants to change the system, what really needs to be changed is the people in office. And they're constantly like, if we just change the system, we wouldn't get bad people. No, we'll always get bad people, which means everybody has to be alert all the time to remove them when they appear. Once again, it's the difference between universalism and particularism. Everybody's like, with universalism, they're like, once and forevermore, we'll come up with a great system, and then all human inequities will be eradicated. No, they'll always be there. What we have to do is throw the bitches out who do shit wrong. There's a question from Villain that doesn't relate to the topic, so I'm going to skip it. Halper said, Semigog, where can we read or hear more of your idea of writing preceding speech? Well, there's this one in Language Sciences, which I mentioned. That's the Elsevier one, volume 33, issue 4, July 2011. And that is, where is mine with the title? Come on now. Marks a distinct subcategory within writing as integrationally defined. You can find that online. You'll have to buy it from Elsevier. Also on Amazon, there's a book called Traditional Marking Systems, which has my basic ideas, some other things that I will be working on in future, specifically related to nationalism. And then we got Jim McIntosh saying, like your Tuareg mini rant. So I'm done now. I'm ready to deal with, for example, people like Charlemagne, and he simply went away. I'm not sure what's up with that. Let me go back as far as I can. And he seems to be just speaking vaguely. I can only go back a certain degree. Wow, all the people from AA's crew seem to be gone. So either my claims are so powerful that no one can contest them, or it's like when I used to get out on the dance floor and start dancing and everybody would leave. So yeah, I'm not sure. It may be time to wrap this up here shortly. Let me look and see if we have any last minute questions, and I will attempt to address them. Otherwise, I will consider this as being, oh, wait, academic agent saying he asked a question? Where? Academic agent is still here? Wow. I just jumped straight up into, I'm all gold now, baby. I'm rolling. This shit is like a 72 Cutlass cruising down the street. I don't see it. Where the hell is it? Repost it, AA. Because I just went back as far as my live chat will go. And I'm double checking, sorry. Nope, I've got those. Nope, that's Villain. Nope, Hopper. Nope, Zed Des saying I need a link tree. Jim McIntosh, thanks. Hard to watch. BDB says, do you think since the system is too far gone to revert to the libertarian way of thinking could be reborn elsewhere? Or is it doomed to external manipulation forever? It's doomed to external manipulation forever, which is the state of mankind, which means we're only going to get little windows when people man their stations at the walls and defenestrate the bitches who are trying to destroy our cultural patrimony. Zeddes says, Semigog, have you worked in the field of naming products that will be internationally consumed? Yes, I have. Or for that matter, products made by foreigners selling to another market. Yes, I've worked both globally and locally, as they say. Okay, so he didn't put Semigog on it, but I think this is academic agent saying, why do you think ANCAPs are into this IP communism? I think I'm going to start talking about the space aliens under the pillow. But serious answer, I think that a long time ago, certainly in terms of the 60s, you know, if you start looking at like anarchists, quote unquote anarchists from, you know, back in the classic days of that, like, you know, your Nestor Makhno or your Kropotkin or your Bakunin, there was just naturally a bunch of overlap with the commie crap, right? You know, 1848 and forward, you know, when we're talking about Bakunin, the period of the Russian Revolution and Civil War with like your Makhnos. So naturally, there was a considerable amount of overlap there. But from everything that I've seen, the libertarians have been subverted. The so-called anarchists have been subverted. And to a considerable extent, a lot of things just flow down from there. So, you know, you'll have people who are well-meaning and believe that they're, you know, they should be card-carrying members who should be admitted to Ancapistan. But because the vast majority of human beings, let's just face it, never ever have thought for themselves, they're going to be like, well, what has a black and yellow label on it that seems like ANCAP or libertarian or minarchist enough for me? And they'll just sort of hear and repeat whatever it is around without paying attention to it. And so it's been largely subverted. Like I've said it on several of my streams. I saw there was like whatever, Anarchapulco or some Anarchy Acapulco, some conference they had. And I was listening to these people and I was like, who are these people? And how is it that they have so thoroughly made me ashamed of ever signaling any kind of adherence to anarchism? By just hearing them speak, I want to run screaming from what anarchism has been turned into. Or it's like your point, AA, with the anarchists being, I'm sorry, the libertarians being the handmaidens to the communists, you know, or like that meme that I put out that has the real dick versus dildo challenge. And it shows some man leaning forward and he's obviously perfectly shaved and he's got his little, you know, chin on his hand. And behind the curtain, someone is sodomizing him. And he's supposed to decide whether or not it's a real dick or a dildo. And of course, I have the guy who's leaning forward doing this labeled as libertarian. And then there is the screen that hides from the viewer's eye the ugliness of the sodomy taking place behind it, and it's labeled freedom. And then there are commies. The guy, you know, pounding his little poo hole is labeled as commie. The libertarians have become the butt boys of the communists, and I don't have to explain it to you. You explained it to me with the business of how they're acting as handmaidens. I think that has simply happened with the anarchists and everybody else too. And they're so used to identifying, you know, whenever they see a yellow and black banner raised, they're like, oh, what am I supposed to salute? Did somebody say Hapa or Mises? Or I'm probably getting all these names wrong because I don't know these people. I haven't studied it, but it was sort of a religious reverence evinced by people who would like bring up the great thinkers of libertarian thought. And I'm like, well, you know, what do they look like when their balls are hanging down and they're naked and they got their feet up on the coffee table and they're drinking a beer? You know, who are these? You know, everybody's a person. Like, anyway, it's the usual human thing. Once again, with celebrity, where, you know, once a proper celebrity endorses something, then, you know, they no longer question anything. All right, what else do we got? Sorry, that could have probably been a better answer, A, but that's all I got after 2 whiskeys. Okay, I'm catching up. Sorry. Louis I always have to count this with Roman numerals. Sorry, dude. I know you deal with this every time. The 17th. Louis the 17th. There's copyright that gives the originator sole rights for a certain number of years. There's copy left, which is open software or works that can be modified or altered. Well, that's not a question. It's a statement, so I'll just let it stand. Funk Finger says, what do you make of AA's claim that inventions are inevitable, but ideas are not? Seems ideas emerge in the same way, except the occasional Einstein. Well, I'm not going to address that last one. Boy, I disagree about that. I think that the ideas and inventions are 6 of one, half dozen of another, and that there probably is, I think, Skeptical Waves was kind of playing games when he talked about the Whig theory of of invention or something like that. I caught it in the chat. I think AA has succumbed to a Whig theory of you know, the march of progress is inevitable. You know, a random idea about a mouse wearing shorts is totally in question, but for some reason, based on some underlying structure in the world that none of us can ever be really sure where it comes from, it's simply inevitable that Edison was going to come up with a light bulb, and inevitable that someone was going to send a rocket to the moon, and inevitable that the Archimedes screw would be created, and inevitable that Velcro exists, which is, it's just kind of weird. It's kind of weird. There's a certain kind of, I don't know, materialist determinism that's, I'm not even, I can't get into it. I've already had too many whiskeys. Man Ray of Hope 23, longtime channel viewer, says, hope you had a great 4th of July. Thank you. Thanks to you too. Matt says, thanks for the stream. Thank you. King Salmonfish says, I also asked a question about IP relating to individual rights and public identity. Give me a second. I'll go back and see if I can find it. Do you think growing mushrooms commercially is a good business decision? Depends on how much you like to eat them. Matthew Daniel says, what is the difference between Disney using ancient Norse gods and folks reformulating or repackaging older ideologies from the 1800s? They did research and do work to reboot these characters. Fine. I don't mind that if Disney comes along and based upon what it has created thus far, says that we have a character named Loki, but don't prevent me from creating any Loki character I want in any book I write, because I am referencing something that, you know, to use AA's term, wasn't homesteaded earlier. Okay, so let me go back. I think we're wrapping up here, folks. I don't see any hot questions. I'm going to go back and see if I can find that King Salmon Fish one. Semigog, do you think that this issue of IP relates to the fundamentals of individual rights? As in, can an individual exist publicly without some kind of character brand reliability? Good question. I would say no. It's the ability of somebody to make a mark. If the only mark I can make, like think about in the East, where the many Asian societies, they put the family name first. The only ones that I'm familiar with who do this in the West are the Hungarians. Go figure. It's not Felix Laiko. For whatever reason, it's Laiko Felix. Naming conventions tend to show the degree to which individual persons are recognized and how much value they have within the society. If the only mark I can make is a clan mark, then how can that clan mark be distinguished from any other member of the clan who is permitted to make that mark? How can the property be distinguished from any other object that bears the clan mark, etc.? And if you start looking into property marks and how oars and fishermen's villages or boats or nets or floats or shields or armor or saddles are marked in cultures that are pre-literate, strictly speaking, in that they don't have writing proper, but they do have marks that are used to mark their objects, you discover that that is precisely the distinction. It's only when you have a reliable mark that you can make that represents you and is recognized by the culture as representing just you, that you exist in terms of property rights, in terms of inheritance, in terms of territorial claims. To whatever extent there is only a general mark, then there is only that sort of collective ownership. So yeah, there's that. Let me see if there are any. That's what? Sure. Oh, already covered that one. Already covered that one. Man, right, there's mushrooms. Already covered that. Man, Charlemagne really did go away, though. I was hoping we could fight a little bit. Let's see here. Don't want to alienate him too much. I definitely need him on for my programmer stream, which is coming up. Check it out, folks, soon. All right, Adam Alexander has a complicated question that, yeah, I don't want to argue the detailed points because I'm not an IP person and I'm not a libertarian and I'm not an economics guy. I don't know that shit. But what I do think I see which I feel is important, is something that everybody should know about, I think, who's arguing about IP, because it comes down to how we orient in our environments and how reliable these marks are, both in the material plane as well as leveling up to the realm of culture. Okay. Well then, BDB says Charlemagne makes excellent points. Haven't seen him in a while. He's a good dude. Of course he's a good dude. He's top drawer, like all of AA's crew, or almost all of AA's crew. The vast majority of AA's crew is absolutely top drawer. Okay, so I guess what I'm going to do now, we got about 10 minutes left, so I'm just going to go ahead. I've spewed, so everyone, I can no longer say that nobody knows what I'm talking about. They can now in future say that they didn't understand what the hell I was talking about, but they can't. I can't say that they didn't hear it. So take it, use it as you will. I will be writing on this subject more in future. Let me jump over here. I'm just going to say good night to everyone. I'm going to join you again. Follow AA's channel. Follow my buddy Charlemagne's channel. Check out all this crew. Pharaoh for art. Check out Apocalyptic Majesty. And be sure to, what is it AA says? Remunerate instead of remunerate. Be sure to remunerate AA when you're visiting on his channel. Apocalyptic. I got Charlemagne, Mr. Patriarch, Prudentialist. Too many good people over there. Check them all out. Enjoy their channels. Let me get over here. I've got my calendar up, and before I say goodnight to everyone, I am just going to tell you what I got coming up. Might be appearing on Unpopular Opinions tomorrow. That depends on AA. He usually forgets on a weekly basis. And I only want to be on there if Charlemagne's going to be too, who is supposed to be, so then he can bitch at me and hate me if he wants for my Judas behavior as regards intellectual property. Further this week, I think I'm going to be doing maybe Wednesday. If not, I don't like to do on days AA's live, so it'll probably be Friday. Either Wednesday or Friday, I'm going to be doing a stream on flamenco and esoteric aspects of it and its music that people aren't aware of. I believe Wednesday the 14th, I'm going to have Conscious Caracol on, and we're going to be talking about lessons from South Africa, various things they have going on there, and lessons we can learn here by looking at them suffering before we do. And then I believe we finally locked in a stream on how programmers think, and it's on them as the new scribal class. And that's going to have a number of people on it. It will be my first large stream. There's going to be me, and there's going to be 5 others. Should be very interesting. All of whom are programmer people or working in IT. Many of whom are poached off of AA's channel. That's coming up on Wednesday the 21st. So programmers on the 21st, Conscious Caracol on the 14th, Flamenco this Wednesday on the 7th. Or on Friday the 9th. And that's what I have for now. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you all for your patience. Very good to see all of you. Thanks very much to AA for showing up. My love to people like Charlemagne and Radlib, Lambda, and others. The Lambda variant, as he will henceforth be known. And yeah, I guess until next time, that's all for now. That's it. You're all wonderful. Catch you later. The final word, I guess, is that it's a semiagog out.